The dust never settled in Dustwell. It hung in the air like a curse, coating everything, the ramshackle buildings, the horses tied to posts, the men who stumbled between saloons. In 1887, this was what passed for civilization at the edge of the frontier, where law was more suggestion than fact, and a man's worth was measured by the speed of his draw and the color of his skin. Inside Murphy's saloon, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the stench of unwashed bodies. A group of cowboys had been drinking since noon, their voices growing louder as the whiskey bottles emptied. Jake Murdoch, a rancher with a face like weathered leather, slammed his glass on the scarred wooden bar. "I tell you, that Eli Morgan ain't natural," he slurred, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Man's been alone out there for what, 3 years now? Ever since Mary died." 4 years, corrected Tom Brennan, the saloon owner, a thick-set man with graying whiskers. 4 years since the fever took her, and he's turned away every woman who's tried to comfort him since. "Maybe he prefers the company of his horse," suggested Will Hartley, the youngest of the group, barely 20 with an unfortunate attempt at a mustache. The others laughed, but it was mean-spirited. The kind of laughter that preceded trouble. "Nah," said Murdoch, his bloodshot eyes lighting up with malice. "I think our high and mighty Morgan just thinks he's too good for decent white women, living out there like some hermit, acting like he's better than the rest of us." The conversation might have ended there, lost in the haze of afternoon drinking, but Samuel Carson, a cattle driver with a cruel streak as wide as the Rio Grande, leaned forward with a grin that promised nothing good. "Boys, I think it's time we taught Morgan a lesson about being neighborly," he said, "and I know just how to do it." The others leaned in, curious despite themselves. Carson had spent the morning at Fort Buchanan, 20 miles north, where he'd gone to sell horses to the cavalry. He'd seen the holding pens there, where Apache prisoners were kept before being shipped to the reservations. Or worse. "There's this Apache woman," Carson continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Young thing, maybe 20 summers. They caught her trying to steal food from the supply wagons. She's been doing labor at the fort, but the sergeant owes me a favor from that poker game last month." Brennan frowned, but his moral compass had long since been drowned in whiskey profits. "What are you thinking, Sam?" "I'm thinking," Carson said slowly, savoring the moment, "that we send Morgan a bride, a proper Apache bride. See how the mighty man handles that?" The saloon erupted in harsh laughter. The idea was so absurd, so cruel, that it appealed to their liquor-soaked minds immediately. Here was Eli Morgan, who'd spurned their sisters and cousins, who kept to himself like he was too good for their company. Let him have an Apache woman, see how he liked being the joke of the territory. "But how?" asked Hartley, caught between excitement and uncertainty. "He won't just take her. Leave that to me," Carson said. "We'll make it official-like. Tell him she's been sent as a mail-order bride, all legal and proper. By the time he figures out it's a joke, the whole town will know Eli Morgan's keeping an Apache woman." They spent the next hour working out the details, each contribution more shameful than the last. Murdoch would provide the wagon. Brennan would write up fake papers. Hartley would spread the word around town, ensuring everyone would be watching for Morgan's reaction. 3 days later, Carson returned from Fort Buchanan with his cruel prize. The woman, they hadn't bothered to ask her name, sat in the back of the wagon, her wrists bound, a coarse blanket thrown over her head. She'd fought at first, Carson told them proudly, showing off the scratch marks on his arms. But hunger and exhaustion had finally broken her spirit. She was dressed in a torn cotton dress, clearly cast off from some officer's wife, hanging loose on her thin frame. Beneath the blanket, they could see she was young, with the high cheekbones and dark eyes of her people. Her feet were bare, scarred from work and walking. She didn't speak, whether from fear or ignorance of English. They neither knew nor cared. "Perfect," Murdoch said, circling the wagon like a vulture. "Morgan won't know what hit him." They set off in the late afternoon, taking the dusty trail that led to Morgan's homestead 5 miles outside town. The woman swayed with each bump in the road. silent as a ghost. Only once did she try to speak, a string of Apache words that might have been pleas or curses. Carson shut her up with a backhanded slap that split her lip. Eli Morgan's ranch sat in a valley between two ridges, a modest spread he'd built with his own hands. The main cabin was solid, well constructed, with a barn and corral showing the same careful craftsmanship. Smoke rose from the chimney, the only sign of life in the gathering dusk. Morgan emerged as the wagon approached, rifle in hand but not raised. Yet he was a tall man, lean from hard work, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that had seen too much. At 32, he looked older, grief having carved permanent lines around his mouth. "Murdoch," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Carson, what brings you out here?" The men exchanged glances, barely containing their mirth. Carson jumped down from the wagon seat, making a show of dusting off his coat. "Special delivery, Morgan," he announced. "Your bride's arrived." Morgan's face went still, dangerous. "My what?" "Your bride," Murdoch repeated, enjoying himself immensely. "Mail order, all the way from Fort Buchanan. Congratulations, you're a married man." Before Morgan could respond, Carson reached into the wagon and hauled the woman out, dumping her unceremoniously on the ground. The blanket fell away, revealing her face, bruised, terrified, but with a spark of defiance still burning in her dark eyes. "There you go," Carson said, tossing a crumpled piece of paper at Morgan's feet. "Marriage certificate and everything. She's all yours." Morgan didn't move, didn't even look at the paper. His eyes were fixed on the woman, who had struggled to her knees, the ropes cutting into her wrists. Blood from her split lip had dried on her chin. "Get her out of here," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that should have warned them. Now, Brennan chided. "That's no way to treat a gift, especially one that cost us so much trouble to arrange. I said get her out of here." Morgan's hand tightened on the rifle. "Or what?" Carson challenged, emboldened by liquor and numbers. "You'll shoot us? Over a Apache woman? Come on, Morgan. We all know you've been alone too long. Maybe a woman, any woman, will do you some good." The laughter that followed was ugly, full of implications. The woman flinched at the sound, trying to make herself smaller. Morgan took a step forward. "Last warning," but they were already climbing back onto the wagon, their mission accomplished. "Enjoy your wedding night," Murdoch called out, whipping the horses into motion. Their laughter echoed across the valley as they disappeared into the gathering darkness. Morgan stood there for a long moment, rifle still in hand, watching the dust settle. Then, slowly, he turned to look at the woman. She hadn't moved, still kneeling in the dirt, eyes downcast. The ropes had rubbed her wrists raw. With a sigh that came from somewhere deep, Morgan set aside his rifle and pulled out a knife. The woman tensed but didn't flee as he knelt beside her. Up close, he could see the bruises on her arms, the hollow of hunger in her cheeks. "Easy," he said, keeping his voice low as he cut through the ropes. "I'm not going to hurt you." She might not have understood the words, but something in his tone must have reached her. She held still as the ropes fell away, then immediately cradled her damaged wrists to her chest. Morgan stood, unsure what to do next. He couldn't keep her. The very idea was insane, but neither could he send her back to wherever Carson had found her. Not in this condition, not with night falling. "Can you walk?" he asked, gesturing toward the cabin. She looked up at him then, really looked, and he saw intelligence in those dark eyes, along with a wariness born of hard experience. Slowly, painfully, she got to her feet. She swayed but didn't fall. Morgan retrieved the paper Carson had thrown, smoothing it out. As expected, it was a crude forgery, barely worth the effort they'd put into it. He crumpled it up and shoved it in his pocket. Then, keeping his distance, he led the way to the cabin. Inside, the warmth from the fire seemed to revive her slightly. Morgan pointed to a chair, then busied himself gathering supplies: blankets, water, what food he had readily available. She watched his every move like a hawk, ready to bolt or fight despite her condition. "I don't suppose you speak English," he said, setting a cup of water in front of her. She didn't answer, but she drank the water in careful sips, her eyes never leaving his face. Morgan ran a hand through his hair, frustrated and angry, not at her, but at the situation, at the men who'd done this, at himself for not knowing what to do next. He couldn't keep her here, but looking at her injuries, her obvious exhaustion, he couldn't throw her out either. "There's a lean-to out back," he finally said, more to himself than to her. "You can sleep there tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out something." Whether she understood or not, she seemed to sense she wasn't in immediate danger. Some of the tension left her shoulders. Morgan gathered more blankets, then led her to the lean-to, a small addition he'd built for storage, but dry and warmer than outside. He laid out the blankets, pointed to them, then stepped back. "It's not much," he said, "but it's better than the ground." For the first time, she spoke, a single word in accented English. "Why?" The question stopped him cold. Why indeed? Why was he helping her? Why hadn't he simply sent her away? "Because I'm not them," he said finally. Because nobody deserves what they did to you." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once, a gesture that could have meant anything or nothing. Morgan left her there, closing the door gently behind him. Back in the main cabin, he sank into a chair and stared at the fire. Outside, winter was coming on fast, the November wind already carrying the bite of snow. He thought of Mary, dead these 4 years, and wondered what she would have done. She'd had a kind heart, too kind for this hard country. Through the window, he could see lamplight in the lean-to. The Apache woman, he still didn't know her name, was probably wondering if she'd traded one prison for another, and maybe she had. Morgan didn't know what tomorrow would bring, what he would do when the sun rose. All he knew was that tonight, for the first time in 4 years, he wasn't alone on his land. It should have felt like an intrusion. Instead, it felt like the first crack in a wall he'd built around himself, brick by brick, since the day he'd buried his wife. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Winter was coming to Dustwell, and with it, Morgan sensed a reckoning he wasn't prepared for. The morning came harsh and cold, frost painting the windows of Eli Morgan's cabin. He'd barely slept, aware every moment of the stranger in his lean-to. When he finally rose, the sun was already climbing, casting long shadows across the frozen ground. He found her awake, sitting in the corner of the lean-to with the blankets wrapped around her shoulders. She'd tried to clean the blood from her face using water from a bucket he'd left, but the bruises stood out starkly against her bronze skin. When he appeared in the doorway, she pressed herself further into the corner, eyes watchful. "Morning," he said awkwardly, then felt foolish. Did she even understand? She didn't respond, just watched him with those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. In the morning light, he could better assess the damage Carson and his cronies had done. Her lip was swollen, one eye blackened. The dress they'd forced on her was torn at the shoulder, revealing more bruises. Eli stepped back, giving her space. He pointed to himself. "Eli," he said slowly, then pointed to her, raising his eyebrows in question. She hesitated, then whispered, "Atsa, Atsa." He nodded, trying the name. "Are you hungry?" The word seemed to mean something to her. She touched her stomach, a gesture that needed no translation. Back in the cabin, Eli prepared a simple breakfast, biscuits, preserved meat, coffee. He carried it to the lean-to on a tray, setting it down carefully before retreating. She fell on the food like someone who hadn't eaten in days, which, he realized grimly, was probably the truth. While she ate, Eli wrestled with the problem she represented. He couldn't keep her here indefinitely, but neither could he send her back to Fort Buchanan, where she'd likely face punishment for escaping, even though she'd been forced to leave. The nearest Apache reservation was 200 miles south, across hostile territory. Even if he could get her there safely, What kind of life awaited her? The day stretched on, strange and strained. Atsa, he tried to think of her by name, to give her that dignity at least, remained in the lean-to, emerging only for necessary purposes. She moved like a wounded animal, careful and alert. Eli went about his chores, acutely aware of her presence. By afternoon, the problem of clothing became pressing. The thin dress offered little protection against the dropping temperatures. Eli dug through an old trunk, finding some of Mary's things he'd never been able to discard. The pain of touching them was sharp but brief. Mary would have wanted them used. He left the clothes outside the lean-to, a wool skirt, 2 blouses, a heavy shawl, thick stockings. They'd be too large, but better than what she had. When he checked later, the clothes were gone, and through a crack in the door, he glimpsed her wearing the wool skirt. That evening, as he prepared dinner, she appeared in the cabin doorway. She'd washed her face and braided her long black hair. The clothes hung loose on her thin frame, but she wore them with a dignity that made his heart twist. "Thank you," she said carefully, the English words clearly foreign on her tongue. Eli gestured to a chair. "Sit, please." She moved cautiously into the room, taking in the sparse furnishings, a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, shelves with a few books. Mary's touches were still visible in the curtains she'd sewn, the rag rug she'd braided. Atsa's eyes lingered on a small daguerreotype on the mantel, Eli and Mary on their wedding day, both young and hopeful. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the wind outside. Atsa ate slowly this time, with careful manners that suggested she'd had some education, perhaps at a mission school before whatever circumstances had led her to Fort Buchanan. After dinner, she surprised him by gathering the dishes, carrying them to the wash basin. He tried to protest, but she shook her head firmly and began washing them with practiced efficiency. When he attempted to help, she gently but firmly pushed him away. That night, she returned to the lean-to without being asked. Eli added more wood to her small stove, checked that she had enough blankets. As he turned to leave, she caught his sleeve. "Why?" she asked again. That same question from the night before. This time, he had a different answer. "Because it's right," he said simply. She studied his face, then nodded and released his sleeve. But as he reached the door, she spoke again. A stream of Apache words followed by broken English. "I work, I clean, cook, no trouble." Understanding dawned. She thought he expected. God knew what she'd been told about white men and their expectations. The thought made him sick. "No," he said firmly. "You don't owe me anything. When you're healed, when it's safe, you can go wherever you want." She frowned, not understanding or not believing. "I work," she repeated stubbornly. Eli sighed. Perhaps it was better to let her feel she was earning her keep, maintaining some control over her situation. "All right, but you rest first. Heal first." The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm, despite Eli's protests. Atsa insisted on taking over the household chores. She cleaned the cabin with meticulous care, mended his clothes with tiny, perfect stitches, prepared simple but satisfying meals from his limited supplies. She worked silently, efficiently, always maintaining a careful distance. Eli found himself watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. There was a grace to her movements, a quiet strength that belied her recent ordeal. Sometimes he caught her humming, Apache melodies that seemed to carry all the sorrow of her people. When she noticed him listening, she would fall silent. The bruises faded slowly, revealing the strong planes of her face. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 22 or 23. Her hands bore old scars, burns, cuts, that spoke of hard labor and harsh treatment long before Carson had dragged her to his door. One evening, as snow began to fall in earnest, Eli returned from checking his few cattle to find her standing at the window, watching the white flakes drift down. There was such longing in her expression that he had to look away. "Beautiful," she said softly, her English improving daily through their limited conversations. "Yes," he agreed. Then, surprising himself, he added. But dangerous, too. Winter comes hard here. She nodded, wrapping the shawl tighter around her shoulders. My people. We know winter. But there. She gestured vaguely north, toward Fort Buchanan. There, no warm, only cold. Always cold. It was the most she'd ever said about her time at the fort. Eli wanted to ask more, but sensed the wounds were too fresh. Instead, he busied himself stoking the fire higher. That night, the temperature plummeted. Wind howled through the valley like a living thing, rattling windows and finding every gap in the walls. Eli lay awake, thinking of Atsa and the lean-to. It had seemed adequate in the fall, but now, he was up and pulling on his boots before he fully made the decision. He grabbed extra blankets and headed out into the bitter wind. The lean-to was freezing, the small stove unable to compete with the cold seeping through the thin walls. Atsa was curled in a tight ball under every blanket he'd given her, shivering violently. Come on, he said, raising his voice over the wind. You'll freeze out here. She shook her head, teeth chattering. No, not proper. Proper be damned, Eli said. I won't have you freezing to death for the sake of propriety. He didn't give her time to argue further, simply gathered her up, blankets and all. She was alarmingly light, all sharp bones and tense muscle. She made a sound of protest but didn't fight as he carried her to the cabin. Inside, he set her on the rug before the fireplace. Stay there, he ordered, adding more wood to the fire until it roared. He dragged his mattress from the bed, laying it near the hearth, then pointed to it. You sleep here tonight, near the fire. She looked from the mattress to him, uncertainty clear in her eyes. You? I'll take the chair, he said, grabbing a blanket for himself. This is just for tonight, until the cold snap breaks. But the cold snap didn't break. For 3 days, the blizzard raged, trapping them together in the small cabin. They developed a careful dance of coexistence. Atsa rising early to tend the fire and prepare breakfast. Eli venturing out to care for the animals, both maintaining a respectful distance in the close quarters. On the third night, as wind screamed around the cabin like demons, Atsa surprised him. She'd been teaching herself English from an old primer he'd forgotten was on the shelf, sounding out words with painful determination. Now she looked up from the book. Your woman, she said, gesturing to the daguerreotype. She was kind? Eli's throat tightened. Yes, Mary was kind. Too kind for this place, maybe. How she die? Fever, 4 winters ago. The words came easier than expected. She was sick for a week. Doctor couldn't come. Roads were bad. By the time he arrived, Atsa nodded slowly. I understand. My mother, my sister. Fever, too, when I was small. They sat in silence for a while, the shared loss creating an unexpected bridge between them. Finally, Atsa spoke again. Those men, they say you need woman. Say I must. She paused, searching for words. Say I must be good to you, or they come back. Rage flared in Eli's chest. They won't come back. And you don't have to be anything to me except safe. You're safe here. She studied him with those dark, knowing eyes. Safe, she repeated, as if tasting the word. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. Long time since safe. That night, for the first time, she smiled, just a small curve of her lips when he nearly tripped over the rag rug. It transformed her face, revealing the woman she might have been in a kinder world. Eli found himself smiling back, and something shifted between them, subtle but significant. When the storm finally broke, neither of them suggested she return to the lean-to. She kept her mattress by the fire, he kept to his bed, and they maintained the fiction that this was temporary. But as November gave way to December, as the snow piled deep around the cabin, the arrangement began to feel less like necessity and more like choice. Eli taught her more English. She taught him snippets of Apache. She showed him how to weave baskets from willow branches. He showed her how to read animal tracks in the snow. They worked together in comfortable silence, two damaged souls finding unexpected solace in shared solitude. One evening, as firelight danced across her face and snow fell softly outside, Atsa reached across the space between them and briefly touched his hand. A gesture of gratitude, perhaps, or something more. Eli didn't pull away. For the first time in 4 years, the cold, empty place inside him felt a flicker of warmth. December brought a false thaw, the kind that made unwary travelers think winter was loosening its grip. Eli knew better, but he took advantage of the milder weather to teach Atsa essential survival skills she'd need if she ever chose to leave, though that possibility seemed increasingly remote to them both. "Hold it steady," he instructed, adjusting her grip on the rifle. "Breathe in, let half out, then squeeze gentle-like." She nodded. Dark eyes focused down the barrel at the target he'd set up, an old tin can on a fence post. The rifle cracked, and the can spun off into the snow. Atsa's face lit up with surprise and pride. "Good," Eli said, trying not to smile too broadly. Again, she was a quick learner, approaching each new skill with intense concentration. Within a week, she could hit the target more often than not. He taught her to load and clean the weapon, to recognize animal tracks, to read weather signs in the sky. "Why you teach me?" she asked one afternoon as they walked the trap line together. Her English improved daily, though she still struggled with grammar. "Everyone should know how to protect themselves," Eli replied, checking a snare that had caught a rabbit. "The world's not always kind to those who can't." She watched him reset the trap with careful attention. "My father taught brothers to hunt, not daughters. Daughters learn weaving, cooking." A shadow crossed her face. Then soldiers came. It was the most she'd volunteered about her past. Eli waited, not pushing. As they moved to the next trap, "I was 14 winters," she continued quietly. "They took many of us to reservation, then to schools, then—" She gestured vaguely. "Different places. Last place was Fort, washing clothes for soldiers. 3 seasons there. 3 years. She'd been at Fort Buchanan for 3 years before Carson had dragged her to his door. Eli's hands tightened on the trapped fox he was freeing, imagining what those years had been like. That evening, Atsa seemed restless, moving about the cabin with unusual agitation. Finally, she stood before him where he sat mending harness leather. "I need to say something," she began, then stopped, searching for words. "Those men, they tell me lies. Say you are bad man. Say I must make you happy or they hurt me more. But you—" She knelt suddenly, taking his hands in hers. Her palms were calloused but warm. "You give me food, clothes, warm place. Teach me. Ask nothing. I do not understand such kindness." Eli's throat constricted. He turned his hands to grip hers gently. "Atsa, listen to me. Kindness shouldn't be rare. What those men did, that's what's wrong, not this." She studied his face intently. "Your heart still belongs to her." It wasn't a question. "Mary's gone," he said softly. "But yes, I suppose part of me went with her." Atsa nodded slowly. "I understand. My heart also has empty places." She squeezed his hands once more before releasing them. "But maybe empty places can hold new things. Someday." The moment stretched between them, fragile and significant. Then she rose gracefully and returned to her evening tasks, leaving Eli to ponder her words. Days later, they were in the woods gathering firewood when Atsa suddenly froze, holding up a hand for silence. Eli heard it too, horses approaching, several of them. Without a word, she melted into the trees, vanishing like smoke. Eli admired her instincts even as he moved to meet whoever was coming. It was a hunting party from town. Judge Horace Bell, Doc Sawyer, and young Peter Garrett, the minister's son. They reined up when they saw Eli, their faces showing various degrees of discomfort. "Morgan," the judge nodded. "Didn't expect to find you out this way." "My land extends this far," Eli said evenly. "Something I can help you gentlemen with?" Doc Sawyer cleared his throat. Just following a deer trail. But since we've met, there's been talk in town about you harboring a runaway. No runaways here, Eli said truthfully. Atsa hadn't run from anywhere. She'd been delivered like a package. Carson says different. Young Garrett piped up, then withered under Eli's stare. Carson says a lot of things. Eli replied, most of them lies. Judge Bell shifted in his saddle. Now, Eli, no one's accusing you of anything improper. But if there's an Indian woman here who should be at the fort or on a reservation, there's a woman here who's doing harm to no one. Eli cut him off. She works for room and board, all legal and proper. Unless the law's changed since yesterday? The judge's face reddened. Don't get smart with me, Morgan. These are troubled times. The Apache have been raiding down south again. People are nervous. People are always nervous about something, Eli said. Doesn't make it right to punish folks who've done no wrong. Doc Sawyer leaned forward. Is she ill? Does she need medical attention? She's fine, Eli said firmly. We're both fine. Now, if you'll excuse me, this wood won't gather itself. The men exchanged glances but turned their horses away. As they left, young Garrett called back. You might want to be careful. Mr. Morgan, Carson's been drinking heavy and talking ugly. Says he's got unfinished business with you. After they were gone, Eli waited a full 10 minutes before calling softly. They're gone. Atsa materialized from behind a pine tree not 10 feet away. He hadn't even seen her there. I should leave, she said immediately. Bring you trouble? No. The word came out harsher than intended. Carson brought the trouble. You didn't ask for any of this. She moved closer, studying his face. Why do you fight for me? The question hung in the cold air. Eli found himself thinking of Mary, of her last days when she'd made him promise to live, really live, not just exist. He'd broken that promise, holding up like a wounded animal. Until now. Because it matters, he said finally. What we do for each other, it matters. That night, a heavy snow began falling, thick and steady. They sat by the fire, Atsa practicing her reading while Eli carved a piece of wood into a simple fox, something to trade in town, though he was really just keeping his hands busy while watching her concentrate on the words. What means dignity? She asked, pointing to the primer. Eli thought for a moment. It means carrying yourself with pride, knowing your worth no matter what others say or do. She nodded thoughtfully. You give me back my dignity. After Fort, I think it was lost forever. It was never lost, Eli said, just hidden for a while. She smiled then, that rare transformative expression. You were a good teacher, Eli Morgan, about shooting, reading, and dignity. Later, as the storm intensified, Atsa grew restless again. She kept moving to the window, peering out into the swirling snow. What's wrong? Eli asked. Storm is very bad. Animals in barn, they have enough food? Water? I checked them earlier, but he grabbed his coat. I'll go make sure. I come too, she said, already reaching for Mary's old barn coat. No need for both of us to freeze. I come, she repeated firmly. You teach me partnership. Yes, partners share work. They fought their way through the blinding snow to the barn. Inside, the animals were restless but safe. Working together, they spread fresh hay, broke ice from water troughs, checked on the pregnant mare in the far stall. Atsa showed no fear of the large animals, moving among them with quiet confidence. As they worked, the barn door suddenly slammed open. Carson stood there, swaying drunk, rifle in his hands. Well, the lovebirds. Eli stepped in front of Atsa. Get out of my barn. Carson, your barn. Everything you got should have been mine. Carson slurred. I had my eye on Mary before you came along. Now you got yourself another woman while decent white women got nothing. You're drunk. Go home before you do something stupid. Carson raised the rifle unsteadily. Maybe I take her back. Maybe I take what should have been mine from the start. What happened next was pure instinct. Atsa grabbed a pitchfork. Eli lunged for Carson's rifle. In the struggle, the weapon discharged, the shot going wild, splintering wood from a beam. Carson fell backward into the snow, Eli's fist having connected with his jaw. "Stay down," Eli warned, breathing hard. "Next time I won't be so gentle." Carson spat blood, struggling to his feet. "You'll regret this, Morgan. Both of you will regret this." He stumbled away into the storm. Inside the barn, Atsa was trembling, not with fear, Eli realized, but with anger. "Men like him," she said quietly. "They take and take, think they own everything, everyone." "He won't hurt you," Eli promised. "I won't let him." She looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes. "You cannot always be there. This is why you teach me to shoot." "Yes." He nodded reluctantly. She was right, of course. The world was full of Carsons. They finished in the barn and struggled back to the cabin. Inside, Atsa touched his hand where knuckles had split on Carson's jaw. Without a word, she fetched water and cloth, cleaning the wounds with gentle efficiency. "Now you have hurt for me," she said softly. "It's nothing." "No, not nothing." She held his hand between both of hers. "Everything you do, everything you teach, not nothing, is everything." The storm howled outside, but inside the cabin was warm and quiet. Atsa finished tending his hand but didn't release it. They sat like that, connected by touch and understanding, as snow piled against windows and winter deepened around them. "Stay," she whispered, so quietly he almost missed it. "When snow melts, when spring comes, I could go, but I want to stay." Eli turned his hand to intertwine their fingers. "I want you to stay too." It was the first admission of what had been growing between them. Not passion, not yet, but something deeper. A recognition of kindred spirits, of two people who had known loss and were learning, carefully, to trust again. That night, as the blizzard raged, they remained by the fire. Atsa curled against his side as he read aloud from one of Mary's books, a collection of poems she'd loved. The words seemed to take on new meaning in his voice, speaking of hope and renewal, of finding light in darkness. When he glanced down, Atsa had fallen asleep, her head on his shoulder, one hand still clasped in his. For the first time in 4 years, Eli Morgan felt the ice around his heart begin to thaw. Outside, winter raged on, but inside their small circle of warmth, spring had already begun. The rumors spread through Dustwell like wildfire in dry grass. By late December, everyone knew that Eli Morgan was keeping an Apache woman at his ranch. The story grew with each telling. She was a witch who'd enchanted him, a savage who'd murdered soldiers, a temptress who'd seduced the grieving widower. Carson, nursing his wounded pride and bruised jaw, was the worst of the gossips. He held court at Murphy's saloon, spinning tales that grew more lurid with each whiskey. "She's got him under some heathen spell. He'd slur. Mark my words. We'll find him with his throat cut one morning." It was Jake Murdoch who suggested they needed to take action. For Morgan's own good, he insisted, though his eyes glittered with malice. "Man's not thinking straight. We ought to rescue him from himself." The plan they hatched was simple and cruel. 3 days before Christmas, they would pay Morgan a neighborly visit with supplies for the holiday. Once there, they would separate him from the Apache woman and convince her, by whatever means necessary, to leave. They rode out on a gray morning with the snow threatening, Murdoch, Carson, and Will Hartley, along with 2 others, Frank Mason and his brother Joe. Men who owed Carson money and couldn't refuse. They brought a wagon loaded with supplies as cover for their real purpose. Eli saw them coming from the window. Something in their formation, the way they sat their horses, sent alarm through him. "Atsa," he said quietly, "go to the root cellar. Now." She looked up from the bread she was kneading. "What is wrong?" "Maybe nothing, maybe trouble, but go to the cellar until I call for you." Her eyes flashed. "I do not hide like frightened rabbit. Please," he gripped her shoulders gently. "For me, if something happens to me, take the rifle from the cellar. Go out the back. Follow the creek north to the Henderson place. They're good people." She studied his face, then nodded reluctantly. As she disappeared through the cellar door, Eli checked his pistol and stepped onto the porch. "Morning, gentlemen," he called, keeping his voice neutral. What brings you out? Christmas charity, Murdoch announced, gesturing to the wagon. Thought you might need supplies, being snowed in and all. That's kind of you, but we're well stocked. We. Carson's voice was sharp. So she's still here then? Eli said nothing, watching them dismount. His hand rested casually near his holster. Now, Eli, Murdoch continued, playing the reasonable man. We've come to talk sense. This situation, it's not proper, not safe. That woman needs to be with her own kind. Her kind? Eli's voice grew cold. You mean human beings? Carson spat tobacco juice. Don't get smart. You know what we mean. Apache belong on reservations, not in white men's beds. Watch your mouth, Eli warned. Or what? Carson stepped forward. You'll hit me again? In front of witnesses this time? The Mason brothers were circling around, trying to flank him. Eli shifted position, keeping them all in sight. State your business and go. Our business is saving you from yourself. Murdoch said. Where is she? Eli? Let us talk to her. Explain the situation. No. Be reasonable. The cellar door burst open. Atsa emerged, rifle in her hands, aimed steady at Carson. You want talk to me? Talk. The men froze. Whatever they'd expected. It wasn't an Apache woman holding a Winchester with obvious competence. Put the gun down, girl. Murdoch said slowly. I am not girl, not your girl, not anyone's girl. Her voice was steady, but Eli could see the tremor in her hands. You come here, to our home. Your home? Carson laughed harshly. You don't have a home. Apache, you have a cage, and we're here to put you back in it. Carson, Eli warned, but Atsa spoke over him. Yes, my home. I cook in that kitchen. I mend clothes by that fire. I plant seeds for spring garden. Her voice grew stronger. This man, she gestured to Eli with her head. He gives me dignity. He teaches me. He sees me as person, not animal. Eli. Will Hartley spoke up nervously. This is getting out of hand. Just let her go peaceful like. We'll take her to the reservation. No harm done. No harm. Atsa's laugh was bitter. You know nothing of harm. Torn from family. Forced to forget our words, our ways. Made to scrub floors until hands bleed. And when we show spirit, when we refuse to be broken. She shifted the rifle to show scars on her arms. This is your no harm. Enough, Murdoch snapped. Morgan, control your woman. She's not my woman to control, Eli said quietly. She's her own person, and she's made her choice. Her choice don't matter, Carson growled. She's property of the U.S. government, a runaway. We're taking her back, one way or another. He reached for his gun. Several things happened at once. Atsa swung the rifle toward him. Eli drew his pistol, and Frank Mason grabbed Atsa from behind, having circled around during the confrontation. She fought like a wildcat, but Mason was twice her size. The rifle fell, and suddenly, everyone was moving. Joe Mason lunged for Eli. Murdoch shouted for order. Carson picked up the fallen rifle. Stop! The command cut through the chaos. Doc Sawyer sat on his horse at the gate, Judge Bell beside him. What in God's name is going on here? Everyone froze. Frank Mason still held Atsa, but loosely now. Blood ran from scratches on his face. Judge, Murdoch started. We were just... I can see what you were just, Bell said coldly. Release that woman immediately. Mason looked to Carson, who nodded reluctantly. Atsa pulled free, moving to stand beside Eli. Doc Sawyer dismounted, medical bag in hand. Is anyone hurt? We're fine, Eli said, not taking his eyes off Carson. The judge remained mounted, looking down at the assembled men. I've been doing some checking. Gentlemen, there's no record of any escaped Apache from Fort Buchanan. No warrants, no missing person reports. He looked directly at Carson. What there is a complaint from Sergeant Mills about unauthorized removal of a worker. Seems someone forged transfer papers. Carson's face went pale. Furthermore, Bell continued, I have here a legal document recognizing the marriage of Eli Morgan and the Apache woman known as Atsa, dated 3 weeks ago, filed proper at the courthouse. Eli started. He hadn't filed any papers. The judge caught his eye and winked almost imperceptibly. Marriage? Murdoch sputtered. To an Indian? The law's quite clear, Bell said. Marriage between whites and Indians is legal in this territory. Has been for 15 years. Any man who interferes with a legal marriage is guilty of disturbing the peace, at minimum. This is wrong, Carson said through gritted teeth. It ain't natural. What's not natural? Doc Sawyer spoke up. Is grown men terrorizing a young couple. I've been out here twice to check on them. They're living quiet, working hard, harming no one. You knew about this? Murdoch accused. I knew Eli needed medical supplies for treating injuries. The doctor said carefully. Old injuries, consistent with long-term abuse, the kind that take patient care to heal. Atsa's hand found Eli's, squeezing gently. Now then, Judge Bell said, I suggest you gentlemen collect your Christmas charity and return to town, unless you'd prefer I file charges for attempted kidnapping. The men grumbled but moved toward their horses. As Carson passed, he leaned close to Eli. This ain't over. Yes, Eli said firmly. It is. They watched the group ride away, the wagon bouncing over frozen ruts. Only when they were out of sight did Eli turn to the judge and Dr. Marriage papers? Bell smiled. Amazing what can be found in courthouse records. Date might be a bit fuzzy, but it's all legal now. Why? Atsa asked, her English deserting her momentarily in confusion. Doc Sawyer answered gently. Because some of us remember what it's like to be outsiders. My family came from Ireland during the famine. The judge here, his grandfather was Jewish. We know something about prejudice. And, Bell added, because Eli's father was a good man who helped many people. Time someone helped his son. They declined offers of coffee, claiming other calls to make. As they left, Doc Sawyer pressed a small package into Atsa's hands. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Morgan. After they were gone, Eli and Atsa stood in the snowy yard, processing what had happened. She still held the doctor's package, wrapped in brown paper, tied with string. Mrs. Morgan, she said softly, testing the words. Is this real? Eli turned to face her fully. Do you want it to be? She looked up at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. They could have killed you. For me. They could have tried. I do not understand. Why does Judge help us? Why risk for Apache woman? Eli brushed a strand of hair from her face. Because not everyone's like Carson. Some people still believe in doing what's right. She was quiet for a moment. Then, in my language, there is word. Gojo means happiness, but more. Means everything in balance. Everything as should be. And are things as they should be? Instead of answering, she rose on her toes and kissed him. It was their first real kiss, not passionate but profound. A promise and a question and an answer all at once. When they parted, both were breathless. Now, she whispered. Now, Skojo. They went inside together, the package forgotten for the moment. The fire needed tending, dinner needed cooking, animals needed feeding. But first, they stood together in their kitchen, their home, and held each other as snow began to fall again. That night, as wind rattled the windows, Atsa opened the doctor's package. Inside was a small silver cross on a chain and a note. For the lady of the house, may you find peace in your new life. Doc Sawyer. She held it up to the firelight, watching it sparkle. I am not Christian. I don't think that matters to Doc. Eli said, it's not about the symbol. It's about being accepted, being seen as belonging. Atsa fastened the chain around her neck, the cross resting against her throat. Then I wear it, to remember this day I became real person in white man's world. You were always real, Eli said firmly. Papers don't change that, she smiled, that rare, beautiful smile. No, but papers help. That night, for the first time, they shared the bed. Not as man and woman yet, that would come, but as two people who had chosen each other despite all odds. Outside, winter raged on, but inside their small cabin, they had found Gozo, everything in balance, everything as it should be. The wedding, such as it was. took place on a clear January morning beneath an ancient pine tree that stood sentinel over a small clearing. No church would marry them, despite the judge's legal documents, but Eli had found another way. Thomas Whitehorse, a mixed-blood trader who sometimes passed through the territory, agreed to perform a ceremony that honored both traditions. He was old, his face weathered by decades of living between two worlds, and he understood what it meant to bridge cultures. Doc Sawyer and Judge Bell stood as witnesses, along with Ben and Sarah Henderson from the neighboring ranch, an older couple who'd quietly supported Eli after Mary's death. Sarah had even brought a cake, small but decorated with winter berries. Atsa wore Mary's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame. When Eli had offered it, she'd hesitated. This was hers, is it right? Mary would want it used. He'd said simply, she believed in new beginnings. Now, standing in the morning light with snow glittering around them, Atsa was radiant. She'd woven eagle feathers into her hair, a gift from Whitehorse, and the silver cross from Doc Sawyer gleamed at her throat. The ceremony was simple, blending Apache traditions with frontier Christian customs. They exchanged vows in both English and Apache, promising to walk the same path, to share both hardship and joy. When Whitehorse bound their wrists together with a beaded cord, speaking words that were old when the mountains were young. Even Judge Bell had to clear his throat. In the eyes of your God and hers, Whitehorse concluded, in the sight of these mountains and under this sky, you are one. The kiss that sealed their union was tender, full of promise. As they turned to face their small gathering of witnesses, Sarah Henderson wiped away tears. About time this ranch heard laughter again, she said, embracing them both. The celebration was modest. A meal in the cabin, stories shared, toasts raised with Ben Henderson's homemade whiskey. As evening fell, their guests departed, leaving the newlyweds alone. That night, their union was consummated with a passion born of long restraint and deep emotion. They came together not as Apache and white, not as savage and civilized, but simply as man and woman who had found in each other a home for their wounded hearts. In the days that followed, life took on new rhythms. Atsa moved her few possessions into the main bedroom. Eli's shirts hung beside the dresses Sarah Henderson had gifted her. Her Apache baskets sat on shelves next to his books. Two lives, slowly weaving together, but peace was short-lived. February brought a brutal drought, unseasonable and devastating. The snow melted too fast, running off instead of soaking into the ground. Wells began to fail. Cattle grew thin. We need to dig a new well, Eli decided, studying their dwindling water supply. There's a spot near the eastern boundary where I've always suspected water runs deep. They worked together, breaking through frozen ground, hauling rocks, reinforcing walls. It was back-breaking labor, but Atsa matched him shovel for shovel, her hands blistering alongside his. On the third day of digging, disaster struck. Eli was deep in the hole when the wall partially collapsed. Rocks and dirt cascaded down, trapping his leg. Above, Atsa heard his cry of pain and peered down to see him half buried. Eli! She started to climb down, but he stopped her. No, it's unstable. Get rope from the barn. She ran faster than she'd ever run, returning with rope and the determination of a woman who refused to lose another person she loved. Working carefully, she secured the rope to a beam and lowered it down. Can you tie it around yourself? My leg's trapped. Can't move much. His voice was tight with pain. Without hesitation, Atsa tied the rope around her own waist and climbed down. The walls groaned ominously as she worked to clear debris from his leg. Get out, Eli gasped. Whole thing could collapse. Then we go together, she said firmly, continuing to dig. Finally, she freed his leg, bruised and scraped but not broken, supporting each other. They managed to climb out just as another section of wall gave way. They lay on the ground, breathing hard, covered in dirt. Atsa examined his leg with gentle hands, determining the extent of damage. You could have been killed, Eli said, catching her hands. Yes, she agreed simply, but you would do same for me. That night, as she tended his injuries. Eli watched her work, efficient, careful, caring. "I love you," he said, the words coming unbidden. They'd shown it in 1,000 ways, but he'd never said it aloud. She stilled, then looked up with eyes bright with emotion. "I love you," she replied in Apache, then repeated it in English. "I love you, husband." The drought worsened. Cattle began dying. Eli was forced to sell half the herd at a loss just to buy feed for the rest. Their money dwindled. Some nights, dinner was thin soup and hard biscuits. "I can go to town," Atsa offered one evening. "Find work, washing, sewing." "No." Eli's response was immediate. "You think they'd hire you? Carson's poisoned too many minds against us." She touched his face gently. "Then what do we do?" "We survive," he said. "We've done it before, but privately." He worried. Without water, the ranch would fail. They'd lose everything. It was during their darkest hour that unexpected help arrived. A small band of Apache, led by an elderly man named Joseph Crow Feather, appeared at their gate. Atsa went rigid with shock. She knew some of them, survivors from her band. The reunion was bittersweet. In rapid Apache, they exchanged news. Who had died, who survived, who had been taken to the schools. Crow Feather studied Eli with ancient eyes. "This is the white man who took you?" he asked Atsa in Apache. "This is the man who saved me," she replied firmly. "My husband." The old man nodded slowly. "We heard stories. An Apache woman who married a white rancher. Some say you betrayed your people." Atsa lifted her chin. "I betrayed no one. I chose life over death. I chose love over hate." After a long moment, Crow Feather smiled. "Your grandmother would be proud. You have her spine." The Apache stayed 3 days. During that time, they shared crucial knowledge. Crow Feather showed Eli where to find water, not by digging wells, but by reading the land as the Apache did, finding natural springs hidden in the rocky outcroppings. "Your people take from the land," he told Eli through Atsa's translation. "My people listen to it. The water is there. You just look in wrong places." Following his guidance, they found a spring that had flowed for centuries, hidden behind a fall of rocks. It wasn't much, but it was enough to save them. Before leaving, Crow Feather performed a blessing over their land and their marriage. "You walk between worlds now," he told them. "It is a hard path, but not without honor." As the band disappeared into the desert, Atsa stood watching until they were out of sight. "I may never see them again," she said quietly. Eli wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Do you regret staying?" She leaned back against him. "How can I regret finding my heart?" The spring water saved the ranch. Slowly, they rebuilt, fewer cattle, but enough. They planted a garden using Apache techniques for conserving water. The drought eventually broke, but the lessons learned remained. One evening in late spring, as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Atsa placed Eli's hand on her stomach. "There is something I must tell you." He looked at her, hope and concern warring in his expression. She smiled, that radiant smile that transformed her face. "We will need to make the cabin bigger, for the child." Eli stared, then whooped with joy, lifting her and spinning her around. When he set her down, there were tears on his cheeks. "Are you sure?" "I know my body. The child will come with the harvest moon." They held each other as stars began to appear. Two people who had found love in the most unlikely circumstances. The ranch spread around them, not wealthy, not easy, but theirs. "What will people say?" Atsa asked. "A half-blood child? Let them say what they will." Eli replied, "Our child will know love. That's more than many can claim." She nodded, then spoke in Apache. A blessing, a promise, a prayer for the future growing within her. And there, under the vast western sky, they began planning for a future neither had dared imagine when a cruel joke had first brought them together. The desert bloomed around them, proof that even in the harshest conditions, with patience and care, life could flourish. Their love, like the hidden spring, had been there all along, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to look beyond the surface. The rattlesnake struck as Eli was moving rocks to expand the garden. He'd been distracted, thinking about the baby, about names and cradles and the future. The serpent's fangs sank deep into his calf before he even saw it coiled in the shade. "Atsa!" His cry brought her running from the cabin. She took one look at the puncture wounds, the snake still coiled nearby, and her face went pale. "Don't move," she commanded, already tearing strips from her apron. She bound his leg above the wound, tight but not too tight, then helped him to the shade of the porch. "The doctor," Eli gasped, already feeling the burn of venom spreading. "Too far. By time he comes." She didn't finish. They both knew what snake bites meant out here, miles from help. Without hesitation, Atsa knelt and placed her mouth over the wound. Eli tried to pull away. "No, the baby, the poison!" She looked up at him fiercely. "Without you, no baby, no life, nothing." Then she bent back to her task, sucking out venom and spitting, her own lips burning from the poison. For the next 3 days, Eli hovered between life and death. Fever raged through him. His legs swelled grotesquely. In his delirium, he called for Mary, for his mother, for people long dead. Atsa never left his side. She applied poultices made from plants Crowfeather had shown her. Desert marigold for inflammation, creosote for infection. She forced water between his cracked lips, bathed his burning skin, held him when convulsions shook his body. On the second night, when his breathing grew shallow and his skin turned gray, she did something she'd never done before. She prayed to the white Christ whose cross she wore. "I do not know your ways," she whispered in broken English. "But Eli knows you. He is good man. Take me if you must take someone, but let him live. Please, let him see his child." Whether it was the prayers, the medicines, or sheer force of will, the fever broke on the third morning. Eli opened his eyes to find Atsa asleep in the chair beside him, her hand clasping his, dried tears on her cheeks. "Water," he croaked. She startled awake, saw him conscious, and burst into fresh tears. "You come back," she sobbed, pressing kisses to his face. "You come back to me." Recovery was slow. The leg remained weak, and Eli walked with a limp that would never fully fade. But he was alive. And as spring turned to summer, they prepared for the baby with renewed gratitude for each day together. It was during this time that Atsa made a decision that surprised them both. One evening, she brought out Mary's Bible, the one item of his first wife's that she'd never touched. "Teach me," she said simply. "The Bible? But you have your own beliefs. Our child will live in your world." She interrupted. "Must know your God, your stories, and I—" She hesitated. "When you were dying, I prayed to him. Maybe he listened. I should know him better." So began evening lessons where Eli read scripture while Atsa listened, asking questions that sometimes made him think harder about faith than he had in years. "This Jesus," she said one night, "he was killed for being different, for teaching new ways." "That's one way to see it, yes." She nodded thoughtfully. "My people understand this. Many killed for being different." She touched her belly where their child grew. "Maybe your God and our spirit's not so different. Both want people to be good to each other." News of the pregnancy had reached town, adding fuel to the fire of resentment. Some, like the Hendersons and Doc Sawyer, were genuinely happy. Others saw it as further proof of Eli's corruption. Jake Murdoch, passing their ranch one day, had shouted, "That half-breed whelp won't be welcome in town. Morgan! Neither will its heathen mother." But there were surprises, too. Mrs. Catherine Walsh, the banker's wife and pillar of propriety, appeared at their door one afternoon with a bundle of baby clothes. "These were my daughters," she said stiffly. "She's outgrown them." Atsa accepted them with quiet dignity. "Thank you. You are kind." "Mrs." Walsh hesitated at the door. I lost a baby once, before Clara. The doctor said I was too old, that I should give up hope. But then Clara came." She looked at Atsa's swollen belly. Every child is a miracle. Mrs. Morgan, every one. After she left, Atsa held the tiny clothes with wonder. Not all hate us. No, Eli agreed. Not all. The summer grew hot, drought threatening again. Eli worked to maintain the ranch while Atsa grew heavy with child, despite her condition. She insisted on helping, tending the garden, preserving food for winter, preparing the small room they'd added for the baby. One blazing afternoon, as Eli repaired fence posts, a familiar group appeared on the horizon. His blood ran cold. Carson, Murdoch, and 3 others, including a man Eli didn't recognize. A hard case with the look of a hired gun. He made it to the cabin before them, grabbing his rifle. Stay inside, he told Atsa. Whatever happens, stay inside. But she was already loading the shotgun, her movements awkward around her belly. We faced together, always. The men reined up at the gate. Carson looked rougher than before, meaner. Drink and resentment had carved cruel lines in his face. Morgan, he called. Time to end this farce. I thought Judge Bell made things clear. Eli responded. Rifle ready but not aimed. Bell's gone to Denver on business. Murdoch said, Won't be back for weeks. Convenient, wouldn't you say? The stranger spoke up, his voice flat and dangerous. Name's Wade Garrison. I'm a federal marshal. These gentlemen have filed a complaint about you harboring a fugitive. Eli's heart sank, but he kept his face impassive. My wife is no fugitive. That's to be determined. I'll need to see her papers. All of them. You mean the papers Carson forged to steal her from Fort Buchanan? Eli challenged. Garrison's eyes narrowed. Careful. Morgan, accusations like that are true. A new voice interrupted. Sergeant Mills from Fort Buchanan rode into view, accompanied by 2 soldiers, and I have the real documentation to prove it. Carson went white. What are you doing here? Judge Bell sent word before he left, Mills explained. Thought there might be trouble. He asked me to bring the actual records. He handed a sheaf of papers to Garrison. You'll find that the woman known as Atsa was legally released from service 6 months ago. The papers Carson used were forgeries. Garrison examined the documents carefully. His expression grew darker with each page. Seems you gentlemen have wasted my time and committed fraud in the process. Now wait, Murdoch started. Furthermore, Mills continued, I have here a letter from Colonel Bradley commending Mrs. Morgan for her service and wishing her well in her marriage. Hardly the words used for a fugitive. Inside the cabin, Atsa gripped Eli's hand as they watched through the window. The baby kicked, as if sensing the tension. Garrison turned his horse to face Carson. You're under arrest for forgery and filing a false report, you gentlemen. He looked at the others. Had best find somewhere else to be, now. As Carson was led away in irons, he twisted to shout at Eli. This ain't over, you hear me? This ain't never gonna be over. But it was. The arrest of Carson broke the back of organized opposition. Without their ringleader, the others slunk back to their lives. Their hatred perhaps unchanged, but their willingness to act on it greatly diminished. Mills stayed for coffee, bringing news from the fort and accepting Atsa's thanks for his intervention. Truth is, he admitted, I never liked how you were treated there. Wasn't right. When the judge contacted me, I was glad to help set things straight. As he prepared to leave, he paused. Ma'am, there's something else. Your cousin, Maria Crowfeather, is at the fort. She's been asking about you. Atsa's eyes filled with tears. Maria lives? She is well. She's married to one of our scouts. Has 2 little ones? I could arrange a visit, if you'd like. Yes, Atsa breathed. Oh, yes. After the soldiers left, Eli and Atsa stood together in their doorway, watching dust settle on the empty road. The threat that had hung over them for months had finally lifted. It's over, Eli said, hardly believing it. Atsa placed his hand on her belly where their child turned and kicked. No, she corrected gently. Now it begins. Real life. Without fear. That night, as they lay together, she spoke of the future for the first time without shadow. I want our child to know both worlds, Apache strength and white man's learning. Your faith and my spirits. Both parts. Together. It won't be easy, Eli warned. There will always be those who see only the differences. Then we teach our child to see the sameness, she replied. To build bridges, not walls. A week later, her labor began with the setting sun. It was long and difficult. The baby turned wrong. Doc Sawyer came, but there was little he could do except offer encouragement. You must be strong, he told Atsa during a brief respite between pains. The baby needs you to be strong. She gripped Eli's hand hard enough to leave marks. I'm Apache woman. I am wife of Eli Morgan. I am strong enough. And she was. As dawn broke, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that seemed to shake the rafters. Dark-haired and perfect, with his mother's high cheekbones and his father's stubborn chin. What will you name him? Doc Sawyer asked, cleaning his instruments. Eli and Atsa looked at each other, then spoke in unison. Thomas Joseph Morgan. For the trader who married us, Eli explained. And for Crowfeather, whose other name was Joseph, Atsa added. Bridge between worlds. As Doc Sawyer prepared to leave, he paused to look at the small family, Eli cradling his son while Atsa watched with tired but radiant eyes. You know, the doctor said quietly, I've delivered a lot of babies in my time, but this one feels like hope. Outside, the sun climbed higher, painting the desert in shades of gold and promise, and in a small ranch house at the edge of the frontier, a family that shouldn't have been possible began their life together. Proof that love could indeed conquer all. The delegation arrived at dawn, 6 months after Thomas was born. Colonel Bradley himself led the group, accompanied by federal marshals and a thin man in a black suit who introduced himself as Indian Agent Cornelius Wright. Their horses kicked up dust that hung in the morning air like an omen. Eli met them at the gate, rifle in hand but pointed down, behind him. Atsa watched from the doorway, their son in her arms. Mr. Morgan, the colonel said formally, we need to speak with your wife. About what? Eli's voice was carefully neutral. Wright dismounted, brushing dust from his coat. About her legal status. There are irregularities that need addressing. She's my legal wife. Judge Bell confirmed. Judge Bell overstepped his authority. Wright interrupted. Apache women who left federal custody without proper documentation are to be returned to the reservation system. She didn't leave. She was taken, Eli said coldly. Kidnapped, more like... Nevertheless, Wright continued. The law requires... The law, a familiar voice cut in, requires nothing of the sort. Old lawyer Abraham Steinberg climbed down from a wagon that had just arrived. At 70, he moved like a man half his age, fire still burning in his eyes. Forgive my lateness. Mr. Morgan, your father-in-law, Mr. Henderson, thought you might need representation. Wright's face soured. This is a federal matter. Indeed it is. Steinberg agreed pleasantly, which is why I've brought federal case law. He produced a thick folder. Shall we discuss this inside, like civilized people? The meeting that followed was tense. Around Eli's kitchen table, Wright laid out his case. Atsa had been a ward of the government. Her removal from Fort Buchanan hadn't followed proper channels, and she must be returned to determine her legal status. Steinberg countered each point with precision. Mrs. Morgan was never formally inducted into the ward system. She was held as forced labor, which the 13th Amendment rather explicitly forbids. Furthermore, he produced a document. I have here a writ of habeas corpus filed on her behalf 8 months ago. By whom? Wright demanded. By her husband. Once he learned the proper procedure, dated 2 weeks after their marriage. Steinberg smiled. I may have helped with the paperwork and the backdating. Colonel Bradley had remained silent throughout, but now he spoke. Right. I've seen the conditions at the fort. What happened to this woman and others wasn't right. Sometimes the law needs to catch up with justice. Wright stood abruptly. This isn't over. I'll appeal to Washington. Do that, Steinberg said mildly. Meanwhile, I'll be filing charges of kidnapping, forced servitude, and denial of due process. The newspapers will find it fascinating. I'm sure. Federal agent attempts to separate mother from infant. It has a certain ring. After they left, Eli found his hands shaking. Atza touched his face gently. You fear for us, she said. It wasn't a question. I can't lose you, either of you. She kissed him softly. You won't. We are stronger than their papers, their laws. We have something they cannot take. But the threat had shaken them both. That night, after Thomas was asleep, they held each other close, aware of how fragile their happiness was. The respite was brief. 2 nights later, Eli woke to the smell of smoke. Through the window, orange light flickered. The barn was ablaze. Fire! He rushed to dress, then stopped Atza as she reached for her clothes. No, stay with Thomas. This could be a trap. He grabbed his rifle and ran outside. The barn was fully engulfed, flames reaching into the night sky. The horses screamed in terror. Eli ran to free them, dodging falling timbers as he fought to open stalls. Behind him, he heard Atza cry out, spinning. He saw figures near the house, 3 men, masked, approaching the door. Atza, bar the door! He shouted, running back. One man turned, raising a gun. Eli dove as the shot rang out, rolling and coming up firing. The man cried out and fell. The others scattered into darkness. From inside came the boom of the shotgun. Atza had fired through the window, driving the attackers back. Eli made it to the porch as riders disappeared into the night. Are you hurt? He called through the door. No, but Eli, the barn. Together they fought the fire, but it was hopeless. By dawn, only smoking ruins remained. Half their winter feed was gone, along with tools, saddles, and equipment they couldn't afford to replace. Sheriff Clayton arrived mid-morning, took statements, examined the scene. I'll investigate, he promised, but his eyes said what they all knew. Masked riders in the night were ghosts, impossible to prove or prosecute. That afternoon, unexpected help arrived. Ben Henderson led a parade of wagons loaded with lumber and supplies. Behind him came neighbors, the Millers, the Kowalskis, even stern Swedish farmer Olaf Lindgren. Heard you had trouble, Henderson said simply. Figured you could use help raising a new barn. Over the next 3 days, the community that had once shunned them came together. Women brought food. Men brought muscle and skill, even Mrs. Walsh appeared with her daughters, setting up tables to feed the workers. Young Peter Garrett, the minister's son who'd once ridden with Murdoch, approached Eli during a break. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for being part of what we did. You weren't the worst of them, Eli replied. No, but I didn't stop it either. Peter looked to where Atza was serving water to workers. Thomas strapped to her back in a traditional cradleboard. She didn't deserve what we did, neither did you. What changed your mind? Peter smiled ruefully. Got a letter from my brother back east. He married an Irish girl. Family threw a fit. Said he was polluting our blood, disgracing the family name. Made me think about things. By week's end, a new barn stood where the old had burned. Stronger, bigger, built by community instead of solitude. As the helpers departed, Atza stood beside Eli, watching the sunset paint the new structure gold. They helped us, she said wonderingly. Some people just need time to see past their fear. Eli replied, not all, but some. Yet the threat remained. Wright sent letters demanding hearings. Anonymous notes appeared on their gate promising worse than fire. Eli took to wearing his pistol always, and Atza kept the shotgun within reach. It was during this siege that Maria Crowfeather finally visited. Sergeant Mills himself escorted her, along with her 2 children. The reunion between the cousins was tearful, conducted in rapid Apache that Eli couldn't follow. But Joy needed no translation. Maria's husband, John Segundo, was a cavalry scout, a man who'd chosen to work with whites while maintaining his Apache identity. Over dinner, he offered advice. You cannot fight their law with force, he said in accented but clear English. Must be smarter. Must make them see you as person, not idea. How? Atsa asked. By being visible, by succeeding, by showing your son can be both Apache and American. He smiled sadly. It is hard path, but only path that leads forward, not back. Taking his advice, Eli and Atsa began attending church in town. The first Sunday, conversation stopped when they entered, but Reverend Garrett, Peter's father, welcomed them warmly, making a point of greeting Thomas. Slowly, Sunday by Sunday, the ice thawed. Thomas, with his ready smile and bright eyes, won hearts. Women who'd crossed streets to avoid Atsa found themselves cooing over her son. Men who'd muttered about half-breeds found themselves discussing crops and weather with Eli. Not everyone accepted them. Some never would, but enough did that life became bearable, even pleasant. The general store extended credit. The school board president mentioned that when Thomas was old enough, he'd be welcome, a statement that would have been unthinkable months before. Then came the letter that changed everything. It arrived on a cold October morning, delivered by special courier. The return address was Washington, D.C. With shaking hands, Eli read it aloud. By order of the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, the investigation into the status of Mrs. Atsa Morgan is hereby closed, based on evidence presented by Colonel James Bradley and testimonies collected. It is determined that Mrs. Morgan left federal custody legally and of her own accord as the wife of a U.S. citizen. No further action will be taken. Atsa sank into a chair, tears streaming. It is over, truly, truly, Eli confirmed, reading the official seals and signatures. You're free, legally, officially, permanently free. That night, they celebrated quietly. Just the three of them, a family no longer under siege. As Thomas slept between them, Atsa whispered in the darkness, I used to dream of freedom, but I dreamed too small. I thought freedom meant only not being prisoner. She turned to face Eli. You taught me freedom could mean love, family, home, future. You taught me the same. Eli replied, I was prisoner too, to grief, to past. You freed me. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. But inside their home, built on love stronger than prejudice, hope stronger than fear, warmth reigned. The document from Washington sat on the mantel, official proof of what they'd always known in their hearts. They belonged together. No law, no hatred, no violence could change that fundamental truth. As snow continued to fall, Atsa sang softly to their sleeping son, an Apache lullaby her mother had sung, passed down through generations. The ancient words spoke of strength and endurance, of finding beauty in harsh lands, of love that transcends all boundaries. And in a small ranch house at the edge of two worlds, a family that had weathered every storm settled into peace, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. Spring arrived with unusual warmth that year, melting snow and awakening the desert with blooms of gold and purple. Thomas, now walking on sturdy legs, toddled through the wildflowers while Atsa tended her expanding garden. The seeds she'd planted, both literal and metaphorical, were finally bearing fruit. It was on such a morning that a lone rider approached, moving slowly, as if unsure of his welcome. Eli recognized him from a distance. Jake Murdoch. But changed. Prison had aged him 10 years, and the 2 since Carson's trial had also swept him up in charges of conspiracy and assault. Eli met him at the gate, hand near his pistol. Murdoch. The older man dismounted stiffly. Gone was the swagger, the cruel certainty. Morgan, I've come to speak with you, and your wife. Speak then. Murdoch removed his hat, turning it in his hands. I've had time to think, too much time, about what we did, what I did. He looked up, and Eli saw genuine remorse in his eyes. I was wrong. What we did to that woman, to your wife, it was evil, plain evil. Atsa appeared in the doorway. Thomas in her arms. Murdoch's face crumpled further at the sight of the child. "Ma'am," he said roughly, "I've come to apologize. I know words don't fix nothing, but I'm sorry. Deeply sorry." Atsa studied him for a long moment. "You have family? A daughter, back east. She won't speak to me since she heard what happened." "Then you understand," Atsa said quietly. "Pain of separation, of judgment." Murdoch nodded, tears running down his weathered cheeks. "I've got no right to ask forgiveness." "But I give it," Atsa interrupted. "Not for you, for me, for my son. Hatred is heavy burden. I choose to put it down." The broken man wept openly then, shoulders shaking. When he finally composed himself, he reached into his saddlebag and produced a document. "I've signed my land over to you." He told Eli, "The section that borders your eastern boundary, got good water, decent grazing. It's the least I can do." "We can't accept," Eli began. "Please," Murdoch said. "Let me do one right thing, just one." They watched him ride away, smaller somehow, but also lighter. That evening, Eli and Atsa walked the new land, 160 acres that would secure their ranch's future. "Do you truly forgive him?" Eli asked. "Forgiveness is not for them," Atsa replied. "Is for us, to live without poison in heart." She smiled. "Besides, land will help Thomas, give him strong start." The community continued its slow transformation. The school board kept its promise. When Thomas turned 5, he was enrolled alongside the other children. The first day was tense, but his sunny nature and quick mind soon won over classmates and teacher alike. Atsa volunteered to teach traditional crafts to interested women, sharing the basketry and weaving skills passed down through generations. Sarah Henderson became her closest friend, the two women bonding over children and challenges. One afternoon, while demonstrating a complex weaving pattern at the church social, Mrs. Walsh approached hesitantly. "Could you teach me?" she asked. "I've always admired the artistry." As Atsa guided her hands, Mrs. Walsh spoke quietly. "My grandmother was Cherokee. My father made her hide it, pretend she was Spanish. I grew up denying half of who I was." She looked at Thomas playing with the other children. "Your boy won't have to hide. That's wonderful." The revelation spread through town like ripple on water. Mrs. Walsh, pillar of propriety, had Indian blood. It forced people to reconsider their assumptions, their prejudices. That summer brought a different kind of visitor, a journalist from Harper's Magazine. Theodore Ashford arrived to write about changing attitudes on the frontier. He'd heard about Eli and Atsa's story and wanted to feature them. "Your story represents something larger," he explained over coffee. "The possibility of reconciliation, of building bridges between peoples." They agreed, cautiously. Ashford spent a week with them, observing their daily life, interviewing neighbors. His resulting article, "Love Across the Divide, A Frontier Marriage," would bring unexpected fame and, more importantly, humanize interracial relationships for readers across the country. But it was a quieter moment that proved most significant. On a hot July afternoon, as Atsa taught Thomas to track rabbits, a small band of Apache appeared on the ridge, led by Joseph Crow Feather. They approached slowly, peacefully. "We come to see the child," the old man said, "the one who bridges worlds." It was a ceremonial visit. Crow Feather blessed Thomas in the old way, painting his face with sacred clay, speaking words that connected him to his ancestors. "He will face hard choices," Crow Feather told them, "but he has strength of two peoples. In him, perhaps, his future where Apache and white man walked together." As they prepared to leave, a young warrior approached Atsa. "Some say you betray your people, but I see truth. You preserve them. In your son, our blood continues. Our stories continue. This too is victory." The years that followed brought both challenges and joy. Thomas grew strong and bright, equally comfortable reading his father's books and learning his mother's traditional skills. At school, he excelled, his quick mind and gentle nature making him a natural leader. Eli's ranch prospered with the additional land. He hired local men, white, Mexican, and even a few Apache, creating a small community of mutual respect. The Morgan Ranch became known as a place where a man's character mattered more than his color. Atsa never lost her accent completely, but her English became eloquent. She wrote letters to the Indian school superintendent advocating for preservation of native languages alongside English education. Some were published in Eastern newspapers, adding to the slow shift in attitudes. On Thomas's 7th birthday, they received an unexpected gift. A package from Washington contained official citizenship papers for Atsa. She was now, legally and fully, an American citizen. "How do you feel?" Eli asked as she held the document. "Like self I always was," she replied. "Paper changes nothing inside, but," she smiled, "it's good to have choices. To vote, to own land in my name, to know Thomas inherits from both parents." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching Thomas play with the Henderson children who'd come for his party, Judge Bell arrived. Older now, moving slowly, but with eyes still sharp. "Wanted to give you this personally," he said, handing over an envelope. "It's from Carson." Eli tensed. Carson had been released from prison a month ago. "Read it," Bell urged. "I think you'll be surprised." The letter was short, written in an unsteady hand. "Morgan, I'm dying. Doctor says the cancer will take me before winter. I've had time to think about what I'd done, about the hate I carried. It poisoned me. Sure as any disease. I seen your boy in town last week. Fine-looking child, smart too, from what folks say. Made me realize what I wasted my life on. Hating what I didn't understand. I got no right to ask nothing. But if that boy ever needs anything, there's money in the bank under his name. It ain't much, but it's clean. Tell your wife she was right to stand up to us. We was the savages, not her, Sam Carson." They sat in stunned silence. Even Atsa, who'd forgiven so much, seemed shaken. "People can change," Bell said quietly. "Not always, not completely, but sometimes enough." Winter came gently that year. On Christmas Eve, their small home was full of warmth and laughter. The Hendersons, Doc Sawyer and his family, Reverend Garrett, even Mrs. Walsh and her daughters gathered to celebrate. As Atsa served the meal she'd prepared, a blend of traditional American dishes and Apache fry bread, Eli watched their guests. These people who had once shunned them now sat at their table as friends. Not all prejudice was gone, might never be entirely gone. But here, in this moment, it had no power. After dinner, Thomas stood to recite a poem he'd learned, first in English, then, to everyone's surprise, in Apache. Atsa had been teaching him quietly, ensuring he knew both his heritages. "That was beautiful," Sarah Henderson said, wiping tears. What did it mean? Thomas translated, "We are all related. The earth is our mother. The sky is our father. We are family under the same stars." Later, as guests departed and Thomas slept, Eli and Atsa stood in the doorway of their son's room. Awards from school hung on the wall beside Apache artifacts. Books sat next to traditional tools. Two worlds, no longer in conflict, but in harmony. "We did it," Eli said softly. "We really did it." "No," Atsa corrected, taking his hand. "We began it. Thomas and his children will continue. Each generation. Bridge grows stronger." Outside, snow began to fall, covering the desert in peaceful white. Inside, the Morgan family slept secure in their love, their belonging, their hope for the future. In the morning, there would be chores and challenges. The world beyond their ranch still held prejudice and pain. But tonight, in this blessed moment, they had won something precious: the right to exist, to love, to raise their child in peace. Atsa Morgan, who had arrived as property, a cruel joke, now stood as wife, mother, citizen. She carried not just Eli's name, but her own dignity, her own story of triumph over those who would deny her humanity. And in the high desert of the American frontier, where hatred had once seemed insurmountable, love had carved out a space for hope. One family, one ranch, one child at a time. The future was being written. The candle flickered in the window, a beacon for all who sought shelter from the storm of prejudice, a light that proclaimed, "Here, you are seen. Here, you are valued. Here, you belong." Thank you all for listening to this story of love, courage, and redemption in the Old West. I hope Eli and Atsa's journey touched your heart as it did mine. Where are you listening from today? Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just as our characters connected across cultures. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories that explore the untold histories and hidden romances of the frontier. Share your thoughts. What moved you most about Eli and Atsa's story? Until next time, partners, keep riding toward the sunset of understanding and compassion.